Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cut to the Chase Bengals Blitz. We're back at it again. I'm your host, Chase Yance. To my right, we got Justin Lacey in the house. What's going on, Justin?
Hey, it's been a minute since we've been on the air together, bro. Since the since the NFL playoffs, so I'm happy to be jumping back on the mic with you.
Most definitely. If you guys are listening or watching us here, like this video, like the audio, subscribe to us on YouTube and every other platform possible. There's so many different ways to listen to podcasts. It's kind of overwhelming, so just pick one and go from there. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened with the Bengals this offseason, a lot of unexpected things to say the least. And we've talked about free agent signings and other stuff. And that wave, that first and second major wave of free agency has come and go. And the Bengals roster itself has been shaped going into the draft. All right. Now, I'll ask you this, Justin. If there's a positional need that the Bengals have to address in the draft, what would you say it would be?
I feel like that they've set themselves up really well upcoming this draft to where they can really kind of test the board in all different areas. But if I'm willing to pigeonhole a particular need, I will still go with the defensive line, more particularly the interior side. And I know we'll get a little bit more in depth with the draft prospects and stuff as the show continues, but that's where I feel like that has the biggest opportunity to become what was the weakness, the pitiful weakness last year, and they can turn that into a strength and almost like overnight. You got two perfect opportunities in the first and the second round if the board sort of falls your way to make it happen. And I think the Bengals need to shoot for it.
And yeah, and that's been a big thing of Cincinnati's downfall over the last year or so. And I'm not going to say downfall, but defensively, when it comes to Cincinnati losing games, they cannot stop the run to save their lives.
Mhm.
And
Right.
when you can't stop the run, it's a slow, painful death. And we've sat through this agonizing torture quite a few times. I know the Bengals, we've won a lot of games over the last 3 years, but the games we've lost, it's basically been because we can't stop the run or even limit the run. That's just what we're asking for at this point. But, again, I agree with you on that point, Justin, with the, defensive interior help. Obviously, signed Sheldon Rankins, big signing for us, 2-year, $26 million deal as a free agent this year. And then DJ Reader leaves. BJ Hill's still on the roster. I think he's got another year left on his deal. I believe I can't remember what
Yeah.
the
I think at the end of the 24 season, his contract is up. Yes, he'll be a
yeah,
free agent, I
so
believe.
yeah, because it's funny because like these years, like 22 and 23, they really all ran together. I'm not gonna
They
lie,
really did.
they
Seriously.
really did though. I can't like I still can't believe we're in 24 right now. Like, we're
Yeah.
we're gearing up for that, but yeah, I mean when it comes to the defensive interior, a lot of guys like looking at some of the prospects, the Newton guy from Illinois. I'm still touching up on these prospects here and there, trying to watch film on them. Not a scout, not a coach or any of that stuff. So I kind of limit watching film on some of these guys, but still want to be, cognitive of who the Bengals could be potentially looking at. Newton from Illinois has been big. The two guys from Texas in the interior defensive line, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy are two guys that definitely could be on Cincinnati's board as well. But an interesting thing that's kind of been said, talking about DJ Reader's departure. Again, I think we all love DJ Reader. If you're a Bengals fan, you love DJ Reader. Love what he did for the city of Cincinnati on and off the field. Fantastic. All right. But when you're looking at the production wise, DJ Reader was known as that run stopper. But then you also look at the numbers, particularly this past season. He's known as a run stopper, but we gave up 130 yards a game rushing. Not saying he's the reason why we didn't. If we stopped the run, he was the reason why we stopped the run. But, it was just, I think it was just shown that changes needed to be made one way or another. Would you agree on that?
I absolutely would agree with that. I love DJ Reader, as what you just mentioned. I don't think that there's a single Bengals fan that does not appreciate what he's brought to Cincinnati in 2020 when we signed him as a free agent. He was that first initial free agent that we brought on the team that helped rebuild the Zach Taylor culture. Remember, people don't realize that in 2019, most of those guys on that roster is not even in the NFL anymore. And
Yeah.
for the longest time, Zach Taylor was operating with Marvin Lewis's old guys, and then he had to wash out that roster and start fresh draft picks. But it also started with finally diving into free agency, which was always a tough talking point for Cincinnati Bengals fans because they never went into free agency with the open arms of, I want to get the best prospects or the best players available that's at regardless of the positional need or value. DJ Reader was that first guy that broke that mold. And people got to understand that when the Bengals signed him initially to his contract, he was the highest paid nose tackle in the NFL at the time. And I don't even think that there was anybody that really surpassed him as a nose tackle for a while. I mean,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure there's probably have been someone that's signed since then, but DJ Reader was the highest paid nose tackle, and the Bengals was not afraid to open up his pocket. The Mike Brown being cheapskate and all that. That
Yeah.
was the first domino to fall about, well, Mike Brown and the front office is really open up their pockets this time around because they understand what's coming in that Joe Burrow draft. And they want to be able to build somewhat of a sustainable team for him to lean on and be able to naturally grow through. Even though we know Joe Burrow has to carry the Superman cape on his back the first time he walked in here,
Yeah.
but DJ Reader helped build that, and we always appreciated that. However, this past season looked a little bit different. Actually, it looked a lot different. It was not good. And as much as I appreciate DJ Reader, we needed his presence on that D line to help stop the bleeding with stopping the run. The rush defense still wasn't good, even when he was playing. And then you talk about his injury, which was really only 4.5, 5 months ago at this point.
Yeah.
It put the Bengals in a tough position, man, that well, you can't really while you want him back, you can't really give him the house, when it comes to the money this time
Yeah.
because he is coming off the injury. You don't know how he's going to rehab. You saw what just happened with Cheeto last year.
Yeah.
The year before, Cheeto was playing like the best corner in the AFC North before his
They forget
injury.
it. They all forget that. They all forget that, man.
Yes,
That's the
yes,
thing.
man.
They
And
all
then his play fell off tremendously this past season, and that's why he's a free agent now. And I wish for him the best in Tennessee with Brian Callahan as he's rebuilding this culture. But
Yeah.
DJ Reader, you don't want to put yourself in this trap. We could talk about the age because I know he's now entering his 30s as well too. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, the Bengals appreciated DJ Reader, and they probably did want him back. They just want him back at a fair market value that made sense for them. And I think that DJ Reader was just having the opportunity of a lifetime where it's like Detroit, they're playing the aggressive ball and they're just
Mhm.
throwing the dollars at him, the world at him. They understand what he could bring to the table for them. They
Yep.
just had a high of going to the NFC Championship, and they had to throw a lot of dollars because they couldn't stop the run, and they know that DJ Reader's specialty was stopping the run. And if you pair him with a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, that could be really good, but it has to pan out for them that way for DJ Reader in sustaining his health, sustaining his high level play. All of that matters. All of that got to connect. And if it doesn't really connect, then the Detroit Lions are going to be one of those teams 2 years from now, or maybe even a year from now, where they probably be like, okay, this contract is not working for us. We got to hurry up and get it off the books. But right now, they're not paying really anybody top dollar. They're
Yeah.
not paying Jared Goff a ton of money. No one's really getting their second contract, if I'm not mistaken,
They got
on
a lot
that
of
team.
rookies. A lot of rookies on their team.
So, with that being said, you can afford to overspend on a guy to get him in your house like a DJ Reader. Whereas the Bengals, on the other hand, is looking to evolve what they were from 21 to 23. They're looking to evolve a little bit further because they have to get better in a different way before they can go, so they can talk about winning championships and stuff. Whereas Detroit, they were living in the situation when we were back in 2021. They didn't make it to the Super Bowl, but they almost did. They had a lot of good promise. I like what they're doing culturally. Dan Campbell has that team on fire, and I think DJ Reader will add to that. But this notion that the Bengals dropped the ball with DJ Reader, I've seen a number of fans say that. I think that's just kind of asinine at this point because I think that it was just time that the Bengals moved on in a different direction. And not
Mhm.
just with DJ Reader, a number of the free agents that we've lost this
Ye
offseason. So
Yeah.
that's where my stance is.
You just know when there's a lot of situations where you know it's time. You can
Mhm.
kind of just have that sense or that feeling where it's like, I think it's time that we both go our separate ways. And it's not a, you know, in that regard, it could be a respect thing where it's like, I respect you enough where it's like you can go get an opportunity somewhere else. You know, we want to bring you back, but we got to do business and everything else. But if you want to go out and get a bag somewhere else, you helped us out tremendously. But, you know, you got to understand both sides of business. So that, you know, it's many different ways. It's a two-way street there. But again, hey, DJ Reader, if there was any other place that he could have gone, like the Lions was the best possible spot, like in my
I think so too.
Yeah, because I mean, it should help them out. Hopefully, he comes off the injury pretty well, and you know, also the Lions being a, you know, they got a special place in my heart with my brother. That, you know, that's his favorite team and all. But again, wish nothing but the best for DJ Reader. But you know, another guy who hasn't been signed yet. He's been talked about amongst a handful of teams, including the Lions a little bit. Tyler Boyd. We're in April. And he's not on a team yet. It's not like Tyler Boyd's a slouch. He was one of the best slot receivers, number 3 receivers in football, who a lot of people forget that he was technically a number 1 receiver for about a year and a half or so. I mean, 2019, the entire season, he had 2,000-yard seasons. I mean, he's been able to carry the load. Whatever team he goes to, he's not going to, you know, carry the load. He's going to probably take the same role that he's had with the Cincinnati Bengals, but just that probably a little lesser of money. But, you know, the Steelers thing seems to have fizzled through. Not entirely sure about that yet, but the Chiefs have interest in him. Apparently the Lions have interest. There was an article on The Athletic. The Dolphins, the Chargers, the Niners. There's about 5 or 6 different teams that have interest in him, but hasn't signed a contract yet. He's taken his time. He's a veteran. He can, you know, kind of, I wouldn't say demand anything, but he's looking for the best possible situation and outcome that could come through. But if you were put in Tyler Boyd's shoes, say you turned into Tyler Boyd today, and you had to sign with the team tomorrow, who are you signing with?
Well, I would sign with anybody that will be willing to take me on. I mean, there's no secret to, I know that Tyler Boyd, he kind of doesn't like the fact that he feels that maybe fans have probably turned on him in a certain way because he talked about, I guess, about a month ago about potentially playing for a rival and being hated in Cincinnati. And that's kind of why the Pittsburgh thing started for real. But my honest to God feeling is that I don't care where Tyler Boyd goes. I just want him to land it on the team, land on his feet because he's still a productive player.
Yep.
And even if that's back with us, that's nothing we're not even talking about. Because look, if the draft doesn't pan out the way that we think it can pan out at the receiver position, we very well could see Tyler Boyd back in stripes again. I genuinely think we could. However, I think that ship is somewhat feeling like it's sailing, and the Bengals are understanding that, similar to DJ Reader, similar to Cheeto Awuzie, Tyler Boyd has almost felt like that he's kind of played his best ball. His best ball days are sort of behind him at this point. He didn't look good a lot last year. Then again, he made some pretty good plays, namely the Vikings game when he made that clutch catch in overtime to set us up for the game-winning field goal. But then another play that sticks in people's craw is the obvious touchdown drop in the end zone against Houston that probably would have won us the game had he would have held on. He still had time on the clock left. CJ Stroud could have very well come to race down on the other side and, you know, threw a game-winning touchdown directly himself.
They ran through us like hot butter that day. It was like a knife through hot butter.
They certainly did. I mean, the whole offense did, you know, that day. But I also believe that the Bengals are made up of a team that they know how to rise to the occasion, even when moments seem lost. But I think at that time, in that moment, where the opportunity was literally in his hands, I think it was just defeated at that point, you know, which that's not a symbolism of Tyler Boyd as a whole, as a receiver. He was the perfect receiver when he first was drafted to the Bengals to be the guy that can sort of carry the torch for like an AJ Green as you usher in a new era of Bengal receivers like a Jamar Chase and a T. Higgins, that he was that guy that understood he was going to play characteristic, unselfish ball. he was going to intertwine himself with those three. He was the perfect guy that can intermingle with that and not be like, well, I'm the older guy here. I'm the older veteran here. I need to get the lion's share of the targets. I need to be the number one listed receiver here. No, and that's why when we went back into 21 debate between Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell, this is why I said draft Jamar Chase, because Tyler Boyd was a part of that reason why. He was going to be the perfect receiver that can intermingle himself along with the talent that was already existing, Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, and then they were going to be able to just make each other better. There were days where Tyler Boyd was the number one receiver, even though we know Jamar Chase was clear-cut number one. We knew that Tyler Boyd days were coming. I remember the Atlanta Falcons game again in 2022. That was a clear-cut Tyler Boyd day, just like it was a Jamar Chase day. That was a whole offensive explosion day to begin with.
There was 2 Atlanta Falcons games that Tyler Boyd had. 2018 got forgot about too, but
he had a one-handed diving catch that was just absolutely superb, and that still sticks to my memory to this day about TB. He's always been unselfish in the receiving room. He always roots for his guys. He was part of the Migos, and I hate to see the Migos break up at this point, but at the same time, the value of the Migos was not always with Tyler Boyd. It was with Jamar Chase more so than anybody else. And Jamar Chase is the only guy, in my opinion, out of the three that can withstand the change that happens year to year.
Yep.
And you can still keep the offense, and Joe Burrow can still be as productive as ever because he knows Jamar Chase is still there. That never really resonated on Tyler Boyd's shoulders, even though Tyler Boyd had his moments. He was never the true guy that week in and week out that you can see putting up 100 yards a game and a couple of tutties and all that stuff. Because if he was, he would be on his third contract by now.
Yeah,
let's just be honest here. There wouldn't have been a need for us to draft the number one receiver in Jamar Chase at that point in time. But again, you respect what he did here. And I tip my cap to him. I wish like crazy hell that he could have gotten a ring in the Super Bowl. But a part of it was his drop pass. That reason why we didn't get that Super Bowl win. Anyways,
yeah.
We're moving on. We were playing with house money at that time, so not on Tyler Boyd's shoulder. But I really, it just looking back on that 21 Super Bowl, you wish like hell the Bengals would have won that for Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon's sake, because now that they're not currently on the team, especially Joe Mixon, he's with the Texans now, it just hurts because we could have had an opportunity to get a ring for them. But they've both experienced their highest of high moments, and they're probably not going to experience that anytime soon unless they ring chase with another team like a Kansas City Chiefs. And I think the Kansas City Chiefs could use a guy like Tyler Boyd. I really do. I think that he can definitely come in there and show some leadership in that receiving room because they're lacking. You see what's going on with Rashee Rice right now in the lawsuits that he's about to get ready to face.
Going many miles.
A guy like Tyler,
jeez,
that's the whole nother separate discussion that Chiefs fans ain't going to want to have because they just drafted this kid. So, but I think also too, teams are waiting around on. I think the reason why teams are not performing the stock options on Tyler Boyd right now at this point, it's just simply because the draft is rich at receiver, and they're trying to see how it all plays out. And then once the draft is over and he's still there and he's still available, which he will be, I think teams are going to be happy to give him a call and bring him in for a workout and sign him to a contract, even if it's a one-year deal, you know. And again, that team could still be the Bengals, but the Bengals are headed in a different direction. They're clearly showing it with this free agency offseason that they're having. And I think that they will still welcome TB back with open arms. But again, it has to be at the right value and at the right price, and if it makes sense for the team.
You've seen it. You saw with a couple other guys. Obviously, the price wasn't, we're not in the organization, but the price wasn't the same for a guy like DJ Reader, et cetera. But, you just got to see how things play out. We're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to have a little history lesson. No tests and quizzes because I got enough of those. But, hey, we're going to talk about some Bengals receivers history because in the 2000s, they've been pretty dominant. We'll be right back. All right, back here on the Cut to the Chase Bengals Blitz. So Justin mentioned something about Tyler Boyd, how, he was, that receiver that was, he was picked in the second round of the 2016 draft. And it's really interesting that year in particular because a lot of Bengals fans I would say blank on that season because, 2015, the Bengals are coming off that debacle of a playoff loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And everything changed that offseason because you lose Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu. Marvin Jones goes to the Detroit Lions. They make the playoffs. Mohamed Sanu goes to the Falcons. They go to the Super Bowl. And the Bengals signed Brandon LaFell, who honestly wasn't that bad that year. He was a pretty good, pretty productive receiver, especially when AJ Green unfortunately got hurt that year. And then Tyler Boyd, second round pick. And he had some flashes then. Just overall in the 2000s decade, ever since Marvin Lewis really stepped in, the Bengals have only had 2 coaches in the last 20 plus years, which is, pretty impressive. But again, that you could have your different notions on that. But think about the trios Cincinnati has had. The 2000s decade specifically was, Chad Ochocinco. It was TJ Houshmandzadeh. It was Chris Henry. It had a big 3 right there. And that group was the perfect mixture of about everything you could have. Mm-hmm. Chad could do everything. He wasn't a huge receiver, but he was so quick, big play guy. He was just a maniac with the football. And then you had TJ Houshmandzadeh, your possession receiver, working the slot, puts on a clinic. Chris Henry, Slim, RIP Slim. I mean, he was the jump ball guy. He was also a big play guy as well. For being that big, he had great speed. I mean, he did, coming out of West Virginia. And that 3, of the 2000s, they were a force to be reckoned with in Cincinnati. And it was really fun seeing those 3 play together. They put up some offensive numbers. Then you go to the 2010s, new quarterback, and Carson Palmer was obviously the quarterback in the 2000s. 2010s now, new quarterback in Andy Dalton. Then you draft AJ Green in round 1 of 2011. And not to mention in 2012, and both actually, they got Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu in the 2012 draft. Mohamed Sanu was a 3rd-round pick from Rutgers. Marvin Jones was a 6th-round pick from Cal. Those 2 ended up starting a majority of games around, late 2012, 2013. And you had AJ Green, who was the top 5 pick, the number 4 overall pick in 2011, was this tall Olympic athlete-esque player who could, just his speed was underrated. His catch radius was ridiculous. His route running was crisp. It was smooth. And then you had Marvin Jones, who was your deep threat, big play guy. He can make a lot of plays out in the field. Mohamed Sanu, more of a big slot receiver, where wasn't really
guy too.
Exactly, though. And he was a gadget guy. He could throw. You go back and you watch the touchdown pass, a dime that he threw to AJ Green week 3 of the 2012 season against the Washington Redskins at the time. But just like, he was a gadget guy, and he was able to just, he was able to just stretch the field in some ways, and he, it just put defenses in a bit of a conundrum. And then you go to the 2020s. Jamar Chase, maniac. Could do anything, everything in the book. T. Higgins, your big jump ball receiver, very good route runner, all this stuff. And Tyler Boyd, your ultimate slot guy, who possession receiver, you can trust him more times than not, and everything else. Man, it just goes under the radar how good the Bengals have built receiving corps in the last 20 years. Isn't that something, Justin?
It is definitely something. I mean, don't get me wrong. There has been lulls between all 3 of those eras to where you saw lack of explosion at the receiver position that basically just terrorized the own offense in its own right. Like, for example, post TJ Houshmandzadeh and obviously post rest in peace to Chris Henry, you saw no explosion in the passing game out of Carson Palmer at all. It was just Chad Johnson and literally no one else. You had Lavernius Coles for a year. That didn't work. You signed T.O. T.O. outplayed Chad slightly, but you just felt like that both guys were just losing the step. And Carson Palmer just didn't have it like that anymore. Ultimately, all 3 of them, that was the last season with that team. And even when you try to sign replacements to try to match the production of what you previously had, it didn't work. It's because the Bengals, one thing I've learned about the old regimes under the Marvin Lewis era, that they fail to evolve past what they normally do really well. It's like if they're really good at developing receivers, that's great. But they're not good at developing the next best thing once that gets figured out. And that's got figured out quite a bit. When we think about Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, AJ Green, both Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones, as you mentioned, left after the 2015 season. That could have been a really Achilles heel of why the offensive line was so bad that year and started out a trend of being bad the rest of the way up until now, even though we feel like that the O-line still needs a little work.
Yeah.
But it's more or less because there was no explosive element outside of AJ Green. There was no tight end threat. Tyler Eifert was always injury prone.
Yeah.
Jermaine Gresham was just nobody good. And just I think he wasn't even on the team at the time. They had no real element to the explosion on offense. And it just felt like that was so predictable that once you neutralize AJ Green and makes Andy Dalton go somewhere else with the ball, Bengals are figured out from there. They
Yep.
wasn't talented enough on defense like they were in years past to stop it. They weren't a complete unit. Everything just had to be perfect, and it just wasn't. And they failed to evolve. So when they signed a guy like a Brandon LaFell, and they did draft Tyler Boyd, they drafted him as a need, not as a value. Tyler Boyd ultimately ended up becoming the hidden value later in the next regime, but not in that current regime when he was originally drafted. And kudos to Tyler Boyd for stepping up. And again, this is me paying homage to TB. Kudos to him for stepping up because when AJ Green was hurt in the 2018 season, Tyler Boyd took off like a rocket.
Yes.
However, it was during the 6-10 season, and the Bengals just wasn't good at football. And then in 2019, as we already talked about, they were the worst in football, and AJ Green missed the whole year. But you
Yep.
knew there were some bright spots that you can sort of keep up with. Going into this era, the Joe Burrow era, you just know that it's led through Joe Burrow. The offense functions through Joe, and that's all you need. Because now I feel like that no matter what changes around Joe, Joe's going to do whatever it takes to get the job done and win games. Even if he got to yell at the front office or the coaching staff or even his own guys,
Mm-hmm.
I think that he's going to be the one that will just be the driving force to where if you do see that it change, the offense in the front office, I think is going to evolve itself a little bit different. We're already seeing that in this term of free agency. But going back into the history of the wide receiver position of the last 20 years, no question. And then the underrated aspect of the 2000s Bengals, you already mentioned the big three with Chad, TJ, and Hoosh. Nobody's talking about the guys like Antonio Chapman and Tad Perry that also came off the board as the 4 and 5 receiver that can substitute themselves in. And they had to at times because Chris Henry couldn't stay out of trouble and he
Yeah.
would get suspended at times. Chad will also get knocked out of the game or, take a big vicious hit across the middle. And then next thing you know, Antonio Chapman has to play on the Y. And then TJ will have to float to the Z. It's all of these different things that they had to make themselves up into and that they developed so quick. But guess what happened? When you start losing those pieces, like an Antonio Chapman, like a Tad Perry. I remember I think both of those guys went to the Miami Dolphins at one point. You start to lose explosive elements. Now, to their credit, in 2009, again, this is before Chris Henry's passing, when they did lose TJ Hushman's out of Seattle, they did do okay up until they lost Chris Henry. And then it just seemed like they just couldn't get it. Chad was okay, but he wasn't the greatest. He was still a Pro Bowl receiver, 1,000-yard receiver that you're all this, that, and the other. But I think that the Bengals, they've done a lot of great work at the receiver position, but there have been a few lulls in between the trio.
Definitely. Definitely. And again, when you're looking on the general scheme of things from an outside perspective, you normally remember the good players in that regard. But when you're a player when you're a fan that follows the team inside and out, you remember everything. And that's when, us making the Super Bowl in 2021, that's when it's like, oh my God, I'm so thankful that we were able to make it, because 2 years ago, we were that bad. And we were literally, I'm blanking on this guy's name. Oh my gosh. Do you remember week 1, 2019? It was Tyler Boyd, John Ross,
Willis,
Damian Willis.
Yep.
He walked out as our 3.
Yes,
And
I
shout out
remember.
to Damian Willis, man. Shout out to him because he was balling out that training camp and took the opportunity in his own hands. But we had Damian Willis out there. All right.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a fan and you remember the name Damian Willis, you better like this damn video, man, because one, you stuck through it, and two, like, I mean, that's pretty impressive. But again, I mean, walking through some of those guys, like we had the walk. James Wright was out there on the field. I'm just trying
Josh
to think of
Malone,
Josh Malone, who caught a touchdown against
Cody
the Colts.
Cody Core.
Dude, Cody Core dropped a very pivotal pass in one of those. I can't remember which one it was. He dropped a critical pass against, it might have been the Steelers or something like that. But yeah, Cody Core walked out there. Josh Malone was out there. The funny thing was, Josh Malone actually played more than Tyler Boyd in 2017. And then Tyler Boyd was ushered back into that spot in week 17, the Raven killer, and he caught a touchdown. And then there you go.
The rest is history from here. And that's crazy that you bring that up, because when I look back on the Josh Malone pick as a draft, I was not high on him, and I didn't even really know who he was at all. But I saw his physique and I saw his build, and I thought, he kind of gives me vibes of Chris Henry. And I think that that's where they were going off of. And I think that's another problem of the Marvin Lewis regime during that time, is that their catalog of memory goes down real deep, and it tells. But they also want to go back to get guys that they were always familiar with, that they had coached before, instead of rebranding what they can be. And there are times where you want to go, like, one of the great things about long tenure head coaches is that you got so many years to go back on that a lot of people don't have that ability to do. And then you can compare and contrast certain things. But at the same time, a lot of players are just not the same. You weren't getting another Chris Henry anytime soon after he left. Okay. There were field stretchers, but there were also guys that just wasn't cutting it. And Josh Malone ended up being a guy that just wasn't cutting it, no matter how much you thought he could have. He just wasn't it. Like you did. You said he did catch a touchdown catch against the Colts that season.
Very random.
That was random.
Very random. But and then again, I mean, another guy who played a lot of kick return, punt return, but had to play receiver at times. Alex Erickson. Trust me, we do not forget that time frame of Bengals football. But again, if you understand and you watched a team, you saw the highs and you saw the lows, that makes you appreciate those highs so much more when you've gone through the the valleys and the values of everything. I mean, the valley shadow of death, I guess, but just in general, like, again, it's something the Steelers wouldn't know. And again, maybe it's like that, it's a compliment to Pittsburgh, but then again, it's also an arrogance towards Pittsburgh. It's like, oh, I don't know what that feels like. Well, maybe go through it one time. I'm not, can't tell the Steelers to go 5-12, but that's off another point. But in general, you don't forget those times, and there were a lot of great Bengals receivers that have walked through that building, and we still have a couple of great Bengals receivers in our own backyard, and a couple of guys who we're looking to develop and maybe step in there, and take that number 3 spot if Tyler Boyd were to walk. So we're obviously going to have a lot of talk in the offseason on that. But just one more thing before we get on out of here. We signed Zach Moss to the deal, 2 years, $8 million. There's other contract details with that. Joe Mixon goes to the Houston Texans via trade, and wish nothing but the best for Joe Mixon. I think he still has some good years in him as well. One thing that people have not been talking about a whole lot outside of Cincinnati, and I'm glad that Pro Football Focus posted this, and it said, name a running back who could break out this year. And who was the face on that cover? Chase Brown. I'm just saying. I'm very excited to see, because we talked about Dan Pitcher was like, we need to get the explosiveness back on this offense. Right. We have to find a way to get it back. Who better than to have Chase Brown in that picture?
I absolutely agree. And I also think that he is my pick as a running back to explode in year two. I really do. I also think that the Bengals did a right thing by signing a guy like Zach Moss because he complements Chase Brown. Chase Brown hasn't really earned the right to be considered the RB1 on this team. What you
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to do was pigeonhole yourself to like what the Minnesota Vikings did when they let Dalvin Cook go. Because
Yeah.
the Vikings were just in this situation. And I think the Bengals learned that they're not the Vikings, that they don't want to be like what they did with Dalvin Cook to Joe Mixon.
Mm-hmm.
Dalvin Cook was straight out cut because he was getting too much money. Now, he was slightly more productive than Mixon. I will give him that. But
Yeah.
then they turned their attention to Alexander Madison, who just did not fit it. And he was just not cutting it for them. And he was good, okay, at some points and times, but his real strength was just being a complement to Dalvin Cook. He was not a leading runner.
Mm-hmm.
Chase Brown, we don't know if he's a lead rusher, but we do know that he can be an explosive back. And he's shown that already on certain plays where he just took a 54-yard screen to the house against the Colts, I believe.
Yeah.
And he knows that he can be, there's more to it, to his game, if you just give him a little bit more time to develop and whatnot. But he's going to need some help. In come a guy like Zach Moss, who again is like the Tyler Boyd, early Tyler Boyd of the running back room, to where he can just complement them very perfectly. And it still doesn't stop you from going and develop another asset in the draft. If you
Mm-hmm.
were to invest a fourth or another fifth round pick at the running back position, or even third round, if you get a little too crazy with it, you got two
Yeah.
picks in the third round.
Best
So
available,
let's
man. Yeah.
let's say if you go out there and get a Will Shipley, get a Audric Estime, get a Blake Corum or something like that to that degree. Those are three guys that you can feel like that they can complement each other very, very well. And competition breeds success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Chase Brown has learned that, hey, when my opportunity, my numbers call, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make it happen. So, hey, I agree with Pro Football Focus with the Chase Brown selection. He has the great opportunity to do that. And I think that he has a great opportunity with his style of running to make more explosive plays in the passing game for Joe Burrow.
Because it's a fire and ice effect where Zach Moss is, him and Joe Mixon are around the same age, but this is nothing Joe Mixon's discrediting or anything like that. Joe Mixon was the lead back of Cincinnati Bengals for 7 seasons, and he ran the football whenever it was him, and not many other people after that. Samaje sometimes, Gio at times, but like it was Joe Mixon's game, like he was getting the ball 18, 20 times a game, all that stuff. And a guy like Zach Moss, he's got more tread left on the tires, you would presume, as a
Right.
running back, and which is a shorter shelf life in the National Football League. So you got Zach Moss to do, you would presume, a lot of the interior run game stuff, the normal traditional stuff, and obviously they can mix it up and everything. But then Chase Brown, he's your pop guy. You can, you saw him take the ball up the middle a couple times against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he looked just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But also
Mm-hmm.
bounce it to the outside, screen game, passing game, all this other stuff. Like you have that balance, and then you keep guys' legs fresh, which is something the Bengals didn't really do a whole lot with Joe Mixon this year, who still had a good year when it came to numbers and everything. But now you finally have a balance where it's like they don't know what to expect, because both guys can do a bit of both. But when they're out there, it's like, well, we gotta keep our eyes peeled, because if we're putting 6 in the box, Zach Moss
Mm-hmm.
or Chase Brown can do something. And if we're loading the box because the Bengals can run the football well, then Joe Burrow is going to be out there to dice you up. So it's a fun thing to think about, and we still have about 5 months until the season starts. So we have a lot of time to just keep talking and thinking about all that stuff. But man, as always, Justin, appreciate you coming on the show. Always fun, and this will obviously be a regular thing coming in this fall, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'm always happy to join you. Like I said, I can't wait to get. I know the next thing we're looking for is the draft, and then obviously the schedule release and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
we just can't wait for the season to get back here. We just feel like that if football was all year round, then that would just make everybody happy. But there's other great things happening in sports. Women's college basketball is now in the Final Four frame. Shout out to Caitlin Clark, who just drilled another 41 points. The ladies are doing phenomenal things in that bracket, and I'm not going to miss it out on the men too. But us men, we have our moments. I don't care about us men right now. I'm focusing on the ladies right now in women's college NCAA. That is some historical stuff that's happening right now.
definitely is. It definitely is. They're doing their thing up there in that Final Four. Hey, it's in our state, in Ohio. So up in the northeast corner. So that'll be fun to watch. Men's Final Four this weekend as well. Just, NBA playoffs. So there's a lot of great things coming up in sports. But then we also talk about that time where we hit June after the finals and it's the dog days. And hopefully the Reds can bring themselves around to help us watch some good baseball. But I digress. We'll end this show. Justin Lacey.